A young girl's desperate plea echoed through the cold mansion walls, her tearful voice breaking with each word. "Please, I'm your daughter." The millionaire who stood frozen at his doorway had no idea that this unexpected encounter would change everything he thought he knew about his life. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. David Carter's sleek luxury car glided through the gates of his suburban mansion, the engine purring to a stop in the circular driveway. After 40 years of relentless ambition, he had become one of America's most celebrated business leaders, revolutionizing the artificial intelligence industry with innovations that had made Carter Technologies a household name. Yet today, all he wanted was to see his daughter. The New York meeting had been unexpectedly canceled, giving him a rare opportunity to return home early. As he collected his briefcase from the passenger seat, David's thoughts drifted to 7-year-old Emma. Once a bundle of giggles and curiosity, his little girl had grown increasingly withdrawn since her mother's passing 2 years ago. The vibrant spark that had once animated her eyes seemed to dim with each passing month. "She's probably at school," he muttered to himself, checking his watch as he approached the imposing front door. A strange uneasiness settled in his stomach, the same feeling that had been haunting him lately whenever he thought about Emma. Was she truly adjusting to life with Vanessa, his second wife? The woman had seemed so caring during their courtship, promising to be a loving stepmother to Emma. The mansion was unusually quiet as David stepped inside, the marble foyer echoing his footsteps. He loosened his tie, calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" A muffled sound from the kitchen caught his attention, something between a whimper and a sob. David moved quickly through the hallway, his pace quickening with each step. When he reached the kitchen doorway, he froze, his briefcase slipping from his fingers and hitting the floor with a thud. Emma was sprawled across the wet tile floor, her small hands clutching a mop nearly twice her size. Her honey blonde hair, so like her mother's, hung in tangled strands around her tear-streaked face. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her tiny frame as she struggled to clean what appeared to be spilled juice spreading across the expensive floor. Standing over her was Vanessa, her perfectly manicured finger pointing accusingly at the child. The CEO's wife looked nothing like the warm, supportive woman he'd married. Her face was contorted with rage, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You worthless little brat! Can't you do anything right?" Vanessa hissed, seemingly unaware of her husband's presence. "Look at this mess. This is why nobody wants you around." Emma's shoulders shook with silent sobs as she desperately tried to mop faster, her small hands trembling with effort and fear. David stood paralyzed, unable to reconcile the scene before him with the peaceful home he thought he'd created. His daughter looked up then, her eyes widening as she spotted him in the doorway. In that moment, the businessman saw something that shattered his heart. Not just fear, but a desperate, pleading hope. "Look what you've done, you stupid, clumsy child!" Vanessa Carter's voice cut through the mansion's foyer like a knife. Her manicured finger pointed accusingly at the puddle of water surrounding Emma. "This is Italian marble. Do you have any idea how much this costs? Of course not. You ruin everything you touch." Emma Carter trembled, her small hands gripping the mop so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tears streamed down her face, creating tiny droplets on her already soaked clothes. "I'm sorry," the 7-year-old whispered, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to help." "Help?" Vanessa laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "The only help would be if you weren't here at all. Your father was perfectly happy before he had to deal with you again." Emma's chin quivered as she looked up at her stepmother. "Please," she begged, "I'm your daughter's daughter. I belong here too." "You belong nowhere," Vanessa hissed, leaning down until her face was inches from Emma's. "You're the reason your mother is dead. A curse. Your father only keeps you out of obligation." David stood frozen in the doorway, briefcase still in hand, watching this nightmare unfold. The shock paralyzed him momentarily before rage surged through his body. "Enough!" he roared, dropping his briefcase with a loud thud. Vanessa straightened immediately, her expression transforming with remarkable speed. "David, you're home early." Her voice now dripped with honey. "I was just teaching Emma about responsibility." She flooded the entire entryway. The CEO stepped forward, his face hardened with anger. "I heard everything, Vanessa. Everything." Emma looked up at her father, hope flickering in her eyes. She reached toward him, desperate for comfort, for validation. But David's focus remained on his wife. "We need to talk, now." His voice was cold, controlled, professional, the same tone he used in board meetings when addressing incompetence. "Daddy," Emma whispered, "she says I'm not really your daughter." David glanced down, his expression softening slightly before hardening again. "You're my daughter, Emma. Go upstairs and change. We'll discuss this later." The dismissal was gentle but clear. No hug, no reassurance beyond those brief words. No acknowledgement of the cruelty he'd witnessed. Emma's outstretched hand slowly fell to her side. The hope in her eyes dimmed, like a candle being snuffed out. She placed the mop against the wall and walked toward the stairs, shoulders hunched, each step heavy with disappointment. As she climbed the staircase, Emma could hear her father's stern voice addressing Vanessa, but the words meant nothing. He hadn't believed her, not really. He hadn't seen the months of torment, the daily cruelties. The little girl reached the landing and turned once, watching the two adults below. In that moment, the distance between them felt infinite. The darkness of Emma Carter's bedroom seemed to close in around her as she clutched her worn teddy bear tightly to her chest. This stuffed animal, the final gift her mother had given her before passing away, was now her only confidant. Tears streamed silently down her small face as she whispered into the synthetic fur, her voice barely audible even to herself. "He doesn't believe me," she murmured, her 7-year-old heart breaking anew. "Daddy thinks I'm lying. Why won't he see what she does to me?" The moonlight cast long shadows across her pink walls, once cheerful decorations, now seeming to mock her pain. Emma buried her face deeper into the teddy bear, seeking comfort from its familiar scent that somehow still carried traces of her mother's perfume. Her room, filled with toys and books that should bring joy, felt empty and cold, a prison rather than a sanctuary within the sprawling mansion. "Mom would have believed me," she whispered, her small fingers tracing the teddy's worn ear. "Mom would have protected me." Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares of Vanessa's sneering face and her father's distant eyes. By morning, Emma's pillow was damp with tears, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed as she reluctantly prepared for school. The little girl moved through her morning routine mechanically, carefully selecting clothes that would cover the bruise forming on her arm where Lucas had grabbed her the day before. She brushed her hair with slow, deliberate strokes, wincing when the brush caught in tangles that Vanessa had refused to help with. Downstairs, the kitchen gleamed with morning sunlight. David Carter sat at the head of the table, his attention divided between his smartphone and the financial section of the newspaper. When Emma appeared in the doorway, he glanced up briefly. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, his tone distracted. Before Emma could respond, Vanessa swept into the room, her face instantly transforming into a mask of maternal concern. "Emma, darling, your eyes are so puffy. Are you feeling all right?" she asked loudly, making a show of touching the child's forehead while David watched. "Perhaps we should call the doctor." "I'm fine," Emma mumbled, sliding into her chair and staring at the untouched toast on her plate. Throughout breakfast, Vanessa maintained her performance, offering Emma extra juice and suggesting home remedies for what she called seasonal allergies. David nodded approvingly at his wife's apparent concern, completely missing the way Emma flinched whenever Vanessa's hand came near her. When the clock finally indicated it was time to leave, Emma grabbed her backpack and slipped out the door, grateful to escape the suffocating tension of the morning meal. Behind her, she heard Vanessa's voice, sugary sweet as she called out, "Have a wonderful day at school, sweetie." The door closed, and Emma was alone again with her silent pain. The dining room of the Carter mansion gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Vanessa Carter presented a perfectly roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables. Her smile was radiant as David entered, briefcase still in hand after his late return from Carter Technologies. "I made your favorite, darling," she cooed, placing a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Emma and I had such a productive afternoon, didn't we, sweetie?" 7-year-old Emma Carter sat rigid in her chair, eyes fixed on her empty plate. She nodded mechanically, her small fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. David noticed her reddened eyes, but attributed it to fatigue as he took his seat at the head of the table. "How was school today?" he asked his daughter, attempting connection. Before Emma could answer, Vanessa interjected. "She had a little trouble with her math assignment, but I helped her through it." She served David generously while giving Emma a significantly smaller portion. "Small appetites need small servings," she explained when catching his questioning glance. As David became absorbed in describing his meeting with investors, Vanessa leaned toward Emma, her voice dropping to a whisper only the child could hear. "Your father doesn't really care about your day," she hissed, smile never faltering for David's benefit. "He's just pretending. Remember what happened to your mother when you demanded too much attention?" Emma's fork trembled against her plate. The teddy bear, her mother's final gift, sat upstairs on her bed, the only witness to her tears earlier that afternoon when Vanessa had locked her in the bathroom for spilling juice. "I think Emma needs an early bedtime," Vanessa announced as the child barely touched her food. "She seems exhausted." David frowned, finally noticing his daughter's pallor. "Are you feeling all right, Emma?" The little girl opened her mouth but caught Vanessa's warning glare. "I'm fine," she whispered. Later, as Rosa cleared the dishes, she discreetly slipped a dinner roll into Emma's pocket, having noticed the child hadn't eaten. The maid's eyes held sympathy, but fear of losing her position kept her silent about what she'd witnessed that afternoon. In his study, David stared at family photographs, troubled by Emma's increasing withdrawal. Something felt wrong in his household, yet he couldn't or wouldn't name it. His daughter was becoming a ghost before his eyes, but business concerns and grief over his first wife's death clouded his judgment. Meanwhile, Vanessa moved through the mansion like a queen, her performance flawless when David was watching. The moment he turned away, her mask slipped, revealing the contempt beneath. With each passing day, Emma retreated further into silence, the walls of her own home becoming her prison. William Carter arrived at the mansion unannounced on a crisp Sunday afternoon. The retired businessman still carried himself with the same authority that had once commanded boardrooms, his silver hair and weathered hands the only indication of his 70 years. David greeted his father with a distracted embrace, his mind clearly elsewhere. "You look troubled, son," William observed, settling into the plush leather sofa in the living room. "How's my granddaughter doing?" David sighed, running his fingers through his hair. "Emma's been different lately, quieter." "Different?" William's eyes narrowed. "I saw her playing in the garden just now. She didn't even notice me watching. That child used to run to me the moment my car pulled up." The two men sat in silence as a maid brought coffee. Through the window, they could see Emma sitting alone beneath an oak tree, clutching her teddy bear and staring at nothing in particular. "She's still grieving her mother," David offered weakly. William leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "It's been 2 years, David. This isn't grief anymore. Something's happening to that child right under your nose." "What are you implying?" David's tone hardened defensively. "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you what I see." Emma flinches when Vanessa enters a room. She barely speaks at family gatherings. Last week, when I visited, she had bruises on her arm she couldn't explain. David's jaw tightened. "Kids get bruises, Dad. They fall." "Not like these," the older man insisted. and not with that look in their eyes, like they're carrying secrets too heavy for their little shoulders. Just then, Vanessa glided into the room, her designer dress perfectly complementing her calculated smile. "William, what a lovely surprise!" she exclaimed, though her eyes remained cold. The conversation shifted to pleasantries, but William's gaze kept returning to the window where his granddaughter sat alone. Before leaving, William cornered his son in the hallway. "David, I've lived long enough to recognize when something is wrong. That little girl is terrified in her own home." "You're overreacting," David muttered, though doubt clouded his eyes. "Am I? Then explain why Emma, who used to chatter endlessly about her day, now barely speaks 3 words at dinner. Why she jumps at sudden movements. Why—" "Enough," David interrupted. "I know my daughter." William placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Do you? Because I don't think you're seeing what's right in front of you." After his father left, David stood in the empty foyer, the mansion suddenly feeling cavernous and cold. His father's words echoed in his mind, but he pushed them away, unwilling to confront what acknowledging them might mean. "Emma, I'd like you to meet Lucas," Vanessa announced with a practiced smile, her arm draped around a sullen teenage boy with dark, watchful eyes. "He's my cousin's son and needs a place to stay for a while. His parents are going through some difficulties." David Carter nodded sympathetically, extending his hand to the boy. "Welcome to our home, Lucas." The CEO's natural instinct to help those in need overrode any questions he might have had. After all, offering shelter to a relative seemed like an act of charity, something his late wife would have approved of. Emma stood partially hidden behind the doorframe, clutching her teddy bear against her chest. Something about Lucas made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "Emma, don't be rude," Vanessa chided. "Come say hello to your new housemate." The 7-year-old approached reluctantly, her small frame tense with apprehension. Lucas's smile didn't reach his eyes as he regarded her. "She's shy," David explained, ruffling his daughter's hair. "She'll warm up soon enough." That evening, David left for an emergency meeting at Carter Technologies. As soon as his vehicle disappeared down the driveway, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted palpably. "Lucas needs Emma's playroom for his things," Vanessa declared, her gentle facade evaporating. "Clear out your toys." When Emma hesitated, Lucas grabbed her teddy bear. "Is this what babies play with?" he sneered, dangling it above her reaching hands. "Please give it back," Emma whispered, tears forming. "My mommy gave it to me." "Lucas is family now," Vanessa said, watching with satisfaction. "You need to learn to share." Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Whenever David was present, Lucas behaved like a model houseguest. The moment his luxury car left the property, Lucas transformed into Emma's tormentor. He accidentally spilled juice on her schoolbooks. He hid her shoes before school. He whispered threats when they passed in hallways. "Nobody will believe you if you tell. Your dad already thinks you're a liar." One afternoon, Emma found her cherished photographs of her mother with torn edges hidden under her pillow. When she confronted Lucas, he smirked. "Prove it was me." From the doorway, Vanessa observed the exchange with cold approval. "Lucas," she called softly, "come help me with something." Emma watched through tears as they walked away, their heads close together, whispering and laughing. She clutched her damaged photographs, understanding with a child's intuition that the threat in her home had just doubled, and her father remained completely unaware. Emma Carter huddled in the corner of her bedroom, clutching her teddy bear, the last gift from her mother, as if it were a shield against the darkness that had enveloped her life. The 7-year-old's small fingers traced the worn fur, finding comfort in its familiarity, while tears silently streaked her cheeks. She had learned that crying loudly only invited more trouble. Earlier that day, Lucas had accidentally spilled juice on her homework, smirking as her carefully drawn pictures dissolved into a soggy mess. When Emma had tried to tell her father, Vanessa had swooped in, her voice honey-sweet in David's presence, but venomous when they were alone. "Your father doesn't want to hear your pathetic lies," she had whispered when David stepped away to take a call. "Remember, you're the reason your mother isn't here. A curse on this family." The little girl now pressed her face into the teddy bear, absorbing her tears into its soft fabric. She no longer tried to defend herself. What was the point? Her father seemed blind to what happened right under his roof, and every attempt to reach him only pushed him further away. From the doorway, Rosa watched, her heart breaking at the sight. The maid had witnessed Vanessa's cruelty unfold over months. The accidental burns from hot water, the meals withheld as punishment, the constant stream of belittling comments. She had seen Lucas follow his mother's example, targeting the child with increasing boldness. "Emma, sweetheart," Rosa whispered, stepping into the room with fresh towels, "I brought you a cookie from the kitchen." The child looked up, her eyes brightening momentarily before darting fearfully toward the hallway. "She'll be angry if she finds out." Rosa sat on the edge of the bed, passing the treat wrapped in a napkin. "It will be our secret." She longed to do more, to tell David what was happening, to protect this fragile child. But with 3 children of her own depending on her income, she couldn't risk losing her position. "Why doesn't Daddy believe me?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible. The maid gently smoothed the child's tangled hair. "Sometimes adults can't see what's right in front of them, especially when they're hurting themselves." A noise from downstairs made them both stiffen. Vanessa's voice called for Lucas, her tone light and affectionate, a stark contrast to how she addressed her stepdaughter. "I should go," Rosa said, squeezing Emma's hand. "Remember, you are not what she says you are." As the maid slipped away, Emma tucked the cookie under her pillow and hugged her teddy bear tighter. In the growing darkness, she whispered to her only true friend, "Mommy would have believed me." The breakfast table in the Carter mansion had become a battlefield. Emma Carter sat quietly, her small hands trembling as she lifted a spoon of cereal to her lips. Across from her, Lucas watched with calculating eyes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Emma, sweetie, you've barely touched your food," Vanessa cooed, her voice dripping with artificial concern. David glanced up from his newspaper, momentarily relieved by his wife's apparent kindness. The moment of peace shattered when Lucas deliberately knocked his bowl of hot soup. The scalding liquid splashed across the table, drenching Emma's school uniform and burning her skin. The little girl cried out in pain. "What have you done now?" Vanessa's tone transformed instantly, her gentle facade crumbling. "Always causing problems. Look at this mess." Emma's eyes filled with tears as she dabbed at her soaked clothes. "Don't make excuses," Vanessa snapped. "Go change immediately. You'll make everyone late." David set down his newspaper, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "It wasn't her fault, Vanessa. I saw what happened." "You're always defending her," Vanessa replied coldly. "This is why she never learns responsibility." As Emma hurried from the room, David felt an uncomfortable weight in his chest. Something wasn't right, but confronting it meant facing possibilities he wasn't prepared to acknowledge. Later that morning, William arrived unexpectedly. The elderly man's eyes narrowed as he observed Lucas lounging on the sofa, playing video games when he should have been at school. "I thought this arrangement was temporary," William remarked to David in the study. "It's been 3 weeks now. Who exactly is this boy?" David sighed. "Vanessa's cousin's son. They're having family troubles." "And you verified this story?" William pressed, his voice low. Before David could answer, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. "William, what a surprise. Lucas is staying with us because he needs stability right now. Surely you understand family helping family?" William's expression remained skeptical. "Family. Yes, I understand that concept very well." From upstairs came the sound of something breaking, followed by Emma's frightened apology. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Excuse me, Emma seems to be having another accident." As she left, William gripped his son's arm. "David, open your eyes. That child is suffering." David pulled away, uncomfortable with his father's intensity. She's adjusting. We all are. Meanwhile, Emma sat alone in her room, silent tears streaming down her face as she clutched her teddy bear. The cycle continued, her voice growing smaller, her hope dimmer with each passing day. The days in the Carter mansion grew darker as Lucas's campaign of torment against Emma intensified. One afternoon, while David was at a meeting at Carter Technologies, Lucas cornered Emma in the upstairs hallway, shoving her against the wall. "This is my house now," he sneered, his face inches from hers. "My mom says you're just in the way." Emma tried to slip past him, but Lucas grabbed her arm, twisting until she whimpered. Vanessa appeared at the end of the corridor, watching with cold satisfaction, before calling out, "Lucas, don't dirty your hands. She's not worth the effort." Instead of protecting her stepdaughter, Vanessa began assigning Emma increasingly difficult chores, tasks far beyond what a 7-year-old could manage. When Emma inevitably failed, punishment followed, meals withheld, privileges revoked, and always the same refrain: "If you were a real Carter, you'd do better." During dinner that evening, David noticed Emma barely touching her food. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, concern flickering briefly across his face. Before Emma could answer, Vanessa interjected, "She's just being difficult again, always so dramatic." Emma's eyes dropped to her plate as her father's attention drifted away, his momentary concern dissolving into distraction. The little girl's shoulders slumped further, the weight of her father's disbelief crushing what remained of her spirit. Later that night, Lucas sneaked into Emma's room and snatched her teddy bear, her last connection to her mother. "Give it back," Emma pleaded, reaching desperately as Lucas dangled it over the stairwell. "This ratty thing? Maybe it needs to fly," he taunted, loosening his grip. Rosa, passing through with laundry, witnessed the scene. For once, the maid's compassion overcame her fear. "Young man," she said firmly, "give that back to her now." Lucas hesitated, surprised by the interruption. "Now," Rosa repeated, "or I will speak with Mr. Carter." Scowling, Lucas tossed the teddy bear at Emma's feet before storming off. Emma clutched the worn toy to her chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to Rosa. The maid knelt beside her, briefly touching Emma's shoulder. "I'm sorry, Nina," she murmured, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I wish I could do more." But both knew Rosa's intervention was a rare moment of courage. The maid had 3 children of her own to support. She couldn't risk losing her position by directly challenging Vanessa. That night, Emma curled around her teddy bear in the darkness of her bedroom, feeling like a stranger in what was once her home. The walls that should have offered protection now seemed to close in around her, a prison where she was forgotten by her father and tormented by those who should have cared for her. Emma pressed her small body against the wall, straining to hear the conversation from the guest room. Through the crack in the door, she could see Vanessa Carter standing over Lucas, her voice hushed but firm. "Remember what I told you," Vanessa hissed, straightening Lucas's collar. "When we're alone, you can call me Mom, but around David, I'm just your aunt, understand?" Lucas nodded, a smirk playing on his lips. "Got it, Mom." Emma's heart sank as the truth crashed over her. Lucas wasn't Vanessa's cousin's son at all. He was her actual child. The realization made Emma's knees weak as she backed away from the door. Everything had been a lie, another manipulation in Vanessa's elaborate game. That night, Emma pulled out her hidden notebook from beneath the loose floorboard under her bed. The worn pages were filled with childish drawings, dark figures looming over a small stick figure with yellow hair. In some pictures, the small figure was crying. In others, she was alone in what looked like a box. Emma added a new drawing. 3 figures now, with the smallest one pushed outside a circle. Across town at Carter Technologies, David sat at his desk, unable to focus on the quarterly reports. His mind kept returning to Emma's face that morning, how she'd flinched when Vanessa had reached to straighten her hair, how she'd barely touched her breakfast. Something was wrong in his home, something he couldn't quite name. He pulled out his wallet and stared at the photo of Emma from 2 years ago. Her smile wide and genuine, her eyes bright with life. When had that light dimmed? When had his daughter become this withdrawn, frightened child? David remembered William's warnings, the concern in his father's eyes. "There's something not right with that woman," William had said. At the time, David had dismissed it as his father's overprotectiveness. Now he wasn't so sure. His phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. "Don't forget we have dinner with the Hales tonight." Richard Hale, his business rival. David frowned, wondering why Vanessa had arranged this dinner without consulting him first. It was one of many small things that had begun to trouble him. Back at the mansion, Emma carefully returned her notebook to its hiding place. Through her window, she could see Rosa hanging laundry in the garden. The maid caught her eye and offered a small, sad smile, the only kindness Emma could count on these days. Emma clutched her teddy bear, the last gift from her mother, and whispered into its worn fur, "I think Daddy is starting to see, Mr. Buttons. I think he might believe me soon." The morning light had barely touched the mansion windows when David Carter left for an emergency meeting at Carter Technologies. Emma stood in the kitchen, her small fingers trembling as she accidentally knocked over a glass of orange juice. The liquid spread across the pristine marble counter, dripping onto the floor in a bright puddle. "You worthless little brat," Vanessa hissed, her charming facade dropping the moment her husband's car disappeared down the driveway. "Look what you've done to my kitchen." Emma scrambled for paper towels. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Enough!" Vanessa grabbed the child's arm, her manicured nails digging into soft skin. "I know exactly where clumsy children belong." She dragged Emma through the house to the basement, where a large walk-in cold storage room housed expensive wines and perishables. With a cruel smile, Vanessa pushed the 7-year-old inside and turned the lock. "Please," Emma cried, pounding her tiny fists against the metal door. "It's so cold. I'm sorry." The temperature inside hovered just above freezing. Emma huddled in a corner, her thin pajamas offering little protection. Her teeth chattered violently as she called for help, her voice growing weaker with each passing hour. In the kitchen above, Rosa heard the faint cries. The maid had witnessed Vanessa's cruelty before, always staying silent to protect her job. But something inside her broke when she realized where Emma must be. "Enough is enough," she whispered to herself, waiting until Vanessa left for her afternoon spa appointment. Rosa rushed to the basement, unlocking the cold room to find Emma curled into a ball, lips tinged blue. "Oh, Nina," Rosa gasped, gathering the freezing child into her arms. Emma's body felt like ice as the maid carried her upstairs, wrapping her in blankets and desperately trying to warm her. By evening, Emma burned with fever. Her small body alternated between violent shivers and concerning heat. When David returned home, he found Rosa applying cool compresses to his daughter's forehead. "What happened?" he demanded, panic rising in his throat. "She's been sick all day, sir," Rosa answered, avoiding his eyes. The family doctor arrived within the hour, his examination revealing more than just fever. Purple bruises marked Emma's arms, and her malnourished state couldn't be hidden under clinical lights. "These marks are concerning," the physician said quietly to David. "And she's showing signs of prolonged exposure to cold." Vanessa stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. "She must have fallen playing outside. Children are so clumsy." David looked from his wife to his daughter, doubt finally taking root. "Emma hasn't been outside today. It's been raining since morning." For the first time, David Carter began to truly question what happened in his home when he wasn't there. The antiseptic smell of the hospital room seemed to intensify as night fell. Emma Carter lay small and fragile against the stark white sheets, her fever causing beads of sweat to form on her forehead. The teddy bear, her last connection to her mother, was clutched tightly against her chest, even in her restless sleep. David sat beside her, his expensive suit rumpled from hours of waiting. The doctor had been clear. Emma's condition wasn't just physical. The bruises on her arms, the signs of prolonged stress, the malnutrition all pointed to something more sinister than childhood accidents. When Emma's eyes fluttered open, they seemed too large for her pale face. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice raw from crying, "do you believe me now? About Vanessa and Lucas?" The question hung in the air between them. David Carter, the man who made million-dollar decisions without hesitation, found himself paralyzed. Part of him wanted desperately to reassure his daughter, but doubt, planted and nurtured by his wife, still lingered. What if Emma was simply jealous of her stepmother? What if these were just childhood fantasies? "I'm trying to understand everything, sweetheart," he finally said, his words hollow even to his own ears. Emma's eyes filled with tears before she turned away, clutching her teddy bear tighter. The monitor beside her bed beat steadily as she slipped back into feverish sleep, her small body curling protectively around itself. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital blinds when a knock at the door announced Miss Parker's arrival. The teacher's face was drawn with concern as she greeted David. "Mr. Carter, I've been worried about Emma for months," she said, pulling a folder from her bag. "These are drawings Emma has made in class." David flipped through the pages, his stomach tightening. Dark, angry scribbles depicted a small stick figure cowering while larger figures loomed menacingly. One drawing showed a child locked in what appeared to be a box, tears streaming down her face. "Children express trauma through art when they can't find words," Miss Parker explained gently. "I've taught for 15 years, and I've never seen such consistent patterns of fear and isolation." She placed her hand on the folder. "Mr. Carter, whatever is happening in your home is destroying your daughter. These aren't normal childhood fears. Emma is crying for help the only way she knows how." David stared at his sleeping child, seeing for the first time how thin her arms had become, how dark the circles under her eyes were. "She needs you to believe her," the teacher said firmly, "before it's too late." The hospital released Emma with strict instructions for rest and care. David carried his daughter to the car, noting how she curled into herself, a small bundle of silence and fear. Back at the mansion, Emma retreated to her room, clutching her teddy bear as if it were her only ally in the world. "I'll find out what's happening," David promised himself, watching Emma's door close with a soft click. The CEO's mind, so adept at solving complex business problems, now turned its full attention to the mystery within his own home. Over the next few days, David Carter began observing his household with new eyes. He postponed meetings, delegated responsibilities at Carter Technologies, and spent more time at home, watching. The patterns emerged slowly, but unmistakably. Emma flinched whenever Vanessa entered a room. Her small shoulders tensed at the sound of Lucas's footsteps. Rosa moved through the house with downcast eyes, her hands trembling slightly when Vanessa issued commands. During dinner, David noticed how his daughter pushed food around her plate, barely eating. When Vanessa reached for the salt, Emma recoiled as if expecting a blow. Lucas smirked at the child's discomfort, exchanging knowing glances with his mother. "Emma, sweetie, aren't you hungry?" David asked gently. "I'm fine," the little girl whispered, her eyes fixed on her plate. That evening, David installed a small recording device in his study after everyone had gone to bed. The next day, he announced a meeting at headquarters, but instead parked down the street, waiting. When he slipped back into the mansion through the rear entrance, the house felt different, charged with a malevolence he'd been blind to for too long. From his hidden position near the kitchen, he heard Lucas's voice, clear and cruel. "Mom says once we get rid of the brat, we'll have everything. The company, the money, everything." "Your mother knows what she's doing," came a woman's voice. Not Vanessa's, but Marta's. "Just keep playing your part." David's blood ran cold. The pieces fell into place. Lucas calling Vanessa mom, the mysterious cousin story, the coordinated cruelty toward Emma. His daughter hadn't been lying or imagining things. The abuse was real, deliberate, and orchestrated by the woman he had married. That night, as David tucked Emma into bed, he noticed fresh bruises on her arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. When he gently asked about them, tears filled her eyes. "Please believe me, Daddy," she whispered. David Carter, tech visionary and millionaire, felt something break inside him and something else strengthen. "I believe you, Emma," he said, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "And I promise you, this ends now." William Carter stood in David's home office, his weathered face etched with concern. "Son, I've lived long enough to know one thing for certain. Children don't lie about pain. Not like this." David ran his hands through his hair, the weight of his negligence crushing him. "I've failed her, Dad. I was so wrapped up in my grief after losing Sarah that I didn't see what was happening right under my roof." "It's not too late," William insisted, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Adults create elaborate lies, but Emma's tears tell the truth. That little girl needs you to believe her now." The CEO nodded, shame burning in his chest. How could he have been so blind? The signs had been there. Emma's withdrawal, her fearful glances, the way she flinched at sudden movements. His daughter had been silently screaming for help while he ignored her pleas. "I need proof," David whispered, more to himself than to his father. "Something concrete that even Vanessa can't talk her way out of." After William left, David began his investigation in earnest. He started in Vanessa's private study, a room she kept meticulously locked. Using the spare key he'd kept hidden, he entered the pristine space, careful not to disturb anything. For an hour, he searched through drawers and files, finding nothing until he noticed a slight bulge beneath the carpet. Pulling it back revealed a hidden floor safe, one he hadn't installed. The combination took several attempts, but eventually the lock clicked open. Inside lay a document that made his blood run cold. A stock transfer agreement between Vanessa and Richard Hale, his most ruthless competitor. The papers detailed a plan to gradually transfer controlling interest in Carter Technologies to Hale's company, with Vanessa receiving millions in compensation. "My God," David murmured, photographing each page with his smartphone. The betrayal was worse than he'd imagined. Not only was his wife abusing his daughter, but she was also plotting to steal his life's work. As he carefully replaced everything, another document caught his eye, a prenuptial amendment he had no memory of signing. Examining it closely, David recognized his forged signature. The pieces were falling into place. That night, as he watched Vanessa across the dinner table, smiling and playing the devoted wife, David felt a cold resolve hardening within him. The woman before him had hurt his daughter, planned to steal his company, and manipulated him at every turn. "Is something wrong, darling?" Vanessa asked, noticing his stare. David forced a smile. "Just thinking about the future," he replied, his mind already racing with plans to protect Emma and expose the truth. David Carter slipped on a pair of dark sunglasses as he trailed Vanessa's luxury car through the busy streets of suburban New York. His heart pounded against his chest, not from fear, but from a righteous anger that had been building since he'd begun to see through his wife's facade. He kept a safe distance, careful not to be spotted, as Vanessa pulled into the parking lot of an upscale restaurant. Inside, hidden behind a decorative plant, David activated the recording device on his smartphone. Across the room, Vanessa was already seated with Richard Hale, his longtime business rival, and Marta, one of his own trusted employees. Their voices carried just enough for the device to capture their words. "Once we have control of Carter Technologies' AI division, we'll restructure everything," Richard said, swirling his drink. "David won't know what hit him until it's too late." Vanessa leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the table. "And what about Emma? She's becoming a problem." Send her to boarding school overseas, Marta suggested. With her out of the picture, you'll have complete control of David's assets. David's fingers tightened around his phone. The casual cruelty with which they discussed his daughter made his blood run cold. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, clutching her teddy bear close to her chest. The 7-year-old froze when she heard Vanessa's voice echoing from the hallway. The woman was on her mobile phone, her tone hushed but urgent. "Everything's going according to plan," Vanessa whispered. "Just make sure the papers are ready to sign next week. Once David transfers those shares, we'll move on to phase 2. Emma crept closer to her bedroom door, her small heart racing. She didn't understand everything, but she knew something bad was happening. Suddenly, Lucas appeared in the hallway, spotting her through the crack in the door. "Spying again, brat?" he hissed, pushing the door open. "Wait until my mom hears about this." Emma backed away, trembling. "Please don't tell her. She'll lock me in the cold room again." Lucas smirked, advancing toward her. "Maybe I should just handle this myself." "That's enough." Rosa's voice cut through the tension like a knife. The maid stood in the doorway, her usually timid demeanor replaced with fierce determination. "You will not touch this child." Lucas faltered, unused to being challenged. "My mother will hear about this." "Let her," Rosa replied, stepping between Lucas and Emma. "I've stayed silent too long." Emma's eyes widened as Rosa took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. David Carter sat in his study, hands trembling as he played the recording for the 3rd time. The voices of Vanessa, Richard Hale, and Marta echoed through the room, their words confirming his worst fears. They had been plotting not only to seize control of Carter Technologies, but also to remove Emma from his life permanently. His stomach turned at the casual cruelty in his wife's voice as she discussed his daughter. "I've been such a fool," he whispered, running his fingers through his hair. That evening, Carter Technologies was celebrating its 10th anniversary with a gala at the company headquarters. The ballroom glittered with success and ambition as employees, partners, and competitors mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. David arrived late, his face a mask of composure despite the turmoil within. Vanessa appeared radiant in an emerald gown, playing the role of devoted wife to perfection. She clung to his arm, smiling for photographers and accepting compliments from guests who had no idea of her true nature. William watched from across the room, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. During David's speech thanking his team, Vanessa suddenly stepped forward, taking the microphone. "I have wonderful news to share," she announced, her voice honey-sweet. "David and I are expecting a child. I'm pregnant." Gasps and applause filled the room, but David stood frozen. This was a desperate move he hadn't anticipated. He glanced at William, who shook his head slightly, then at James Miller, who stood ready by the exit. "Vanessa," David said quietly, taking back the microphone, "that's impossible." Her smile faltered. "What are you saying? Of course it's possible." "We haven't shared a bedroom in 3 months," he stated, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent hall. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. "How dare you humiliate me? I have proof of everything," David continued, his voice steady. "Your meetings with Richard Hale, your plans for my company, your treatment of my daughter." Chaos erupted as Vanessa lunged at him, screaming accusations. James Miller and his security team moved swiftly, separating them as guests watched in shocked silence. "I've arranged for Dr. Levine to perform a pregnancy test immediately," David announced, "to settle this matter once and for all." 2 hours later, in the doctor's office with William and James as witnesses, Dr. Levine confirmed what David already knew. Vanessa was not pregnant. Her final desperate lie had crumbled, leaving her exposed. "It's over, Vanessa," David said, his voice hollow with exhaustion and relief. "You'll never hurt Emma again." As she was escorted away, David's phone rang. It was Rosa, her voice urgent and afraid. "Mr. Carter, you need to come home now. Something's happening with Emma." James Miller, the security chief at Carter Technologies, had been monitoring the company's systems ever since David alerted him about potential corporate espionage. His vigilance paid off when security cameras captured Marta accessing the server room after hours. The loyal security chief watched as she downloaded confidential data onto a portable device, her nervous glances betraying her guilt. "I've got her," James whispered into his mobile phone, updating David, who had been waiting for this confirmation. Within minutes, security personnel surrounded Marta as she attempted to leave the building. The next morning, David called an emergency board meeting. The tension in the conference room was palpable as executives gathered, confused by the urgency. When Richard Hale arrived, his usual confidence faltered at the sight of Marta sitting beside James, her eyes downcast. "We have evidence of a conspiracy against this company," David announced, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. The security chief presented the footage showing Marta stealing proprietary information. When confronted with irrefutable evidence, she broke down. "It was Vanessa's idea," Marta confessed, her voice barely audible. "She promised me a position in the new management structure once Richard took control." Her testimony implicated both Vanessa and Richard in a scheme to seize control of Carter Technologies through stock manipulation and industrial espionage. Richard attempted to deny everything, but his protests died when David played the recording of his meeting with Vanessa. The board members listened in stunned silence as the plot unfolded through their own words. Meanwhile, at the Carter mansion, Rosa was packing her belongings, having decided she could no longer stay silent. When David returned home, the maid approached him with trembling hands but determined eyes. "I need to tell you something about Emma," she said. For the next hour, Rosa detailed every instance of abuse she had witnessed. Vanessa's cruel words, Lucas's bullying, and the cold storage room incident that had nearly cost Emma her health. "I was afraid to lose my job," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But I cannot live with myself knowing what that woman did to your daughter." David placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're not going anywhere, Rosa. Emma needs you now more than ever." The following day, Rosa accompanied Emma to speak with a child psychologist, holding the little girl's hand as she finally shared her painful experiences. With each word, Emma seemed to grow stronger, no longer carrying the burden of unheard suffering. The truth had finally emerged from the shadows, illuminating not just Vanessa's business betrayal, but the far more heinous crime of abusing an innocent child who had only wanted to be loved. Vanessa paced the master bedroom, her manicured nails digging into her palms as she processed the unraveling of her carefully constructed world. The evidence against her was mounting by the hour. She glanced at her phone. Richard Hale hadn't returned her desperate calls, and Marta had already been detained. "Pack only what you need," she hissed at Lucas, who stood uncertainly in the doorway. "We're leaving tonight." "What about Emma?" the boy asked, his voice smaller than usual. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with dangerous determination. "She's coming with us. David loves that child more than anything. Once we have her, he'll come around." Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I don't think," she snapped. "Just do as I say." Downstairs, Rosa was helping Emma prepare for bed, gently brushing the child's hair when she overheard hushed voices and the sound of suitcases being dragged across the floor. The maid's instincts flared. She quietly instructed Emma to hide in the laundry room and immediately called David. "They're planning something, sir," Rosa whispered urgently into her mobile. "Please, hurry." David was already en route, having left an emergency meeting with James Miller and the authorities. "Keep Emma safe," he instructed. "I'm 10 minutes away." But Vanessa moved faster than anticipated. She burst into Emma's bedroom, finding it empty. Rage contorted her features as she stormed through the house, eventually discovering the child huddled behind stacks of clean linens. "Come here, you little brat," Vanessa snarled, yanking Emma by the arm. "We're going on a trip." Emma's terrified screams echoed through the mansion as Rosa attempted to intervene. Lucas watched in horror as his mother shoved the loyal maid aside, causing her to fall and hit her head against the washing machine. "Lucas, get the car," Vanessa commanded, dragging a struggling Emma toward the garage. The boy hesitated, witnessing for the first time the full extent of his mother's madness. But years of conditioning won out, and he reluctantly complied. As their vehicles sped away from the estate, David's car screeched into the driveway. Finding Rosa dazed but conscious, he immediately alerted the police and security team already on standby. What followed was a frantic pursuit down the darkened highway. James Miller coordinated with local authorities, setting up roadblocks while tracking the vehicle's GPS. Inside the fleeing automobile, Emma sobbed in the back seat while Vanessa drove erratically, ignoring Lucas's pleas to stop. When police lights appeared in the rearview mirror, Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. "Mom, please," Lucas begged as she accelerated. "This is wrong." The chase ended when police vehicles boxed them in. As officers approached with weapons drawn, Lucas made his choice. He unlocked the doors against his mother's screams. When David reached the scene, he found Emma trembling between two police officers. The moment she saw her father, the little girl broke free and ran toward him, collapsing into his arms with heart-wrenching sobs. "I've got you," David whispered, holding his daughter tightly as Vanessa was led away in handcuffs. "I've got you now, and I'm never letting go again." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harrison delivered the verdict. David Carter sat rigid, his eyes fixed on Vanessa, who stood pale-faced at the defendant's stand. The woman who had once shared his bed now faced the consequences of her cruelty. For the charges of child abuse, attempted kidnapping, and corporate espionage, the judge declared, "This court sentences Vanessa Carter to 8 years in prison with no possibility of early parole." Vanessa's composure finally cracked. She screamed accusations across the courtroom, her carefully maintained facade shattering completely. Security personnel moved quickly to restrain her as she lunged toward David, her eyes wild with hatred. Richard Hale received his own sentence moments later. Barred from any corporate leadership position for 15 years and ordered to pay substantial damages to Carter Technologies. The business rival who had conspired to steal David's company slumped in defeat, his reputation in tatters. Marta, looking small and frightened in her prison jumpsuit, received 4 years for her role in the conspiracy. She avoided eye contact with everyone as officers led her away. The judge's voice softened slightly when addressing Lucas's case. As a minor clearly manipulated by his mother, Lucas will be remanded to a juvenile rehabilitation facility where he will receive the psychological support he needs. Throughout the proceedings, Emma sat nestled in Rosa's protective embrace in the gallery. The 7-year-old no longer trembled at every loud noise. Though still recovering from her ordeal, a quiet strength had begun to replace her fear. "It's over now, pequeña," Rosa whispered, stroking Emma's hair. The maid, who had finally found the courage to testify about the abuse she'd witnessed, held the child close, her testimony having been crucial in securing Vanessa's conviction. William Carter placed a weathered hand on his son's shoulder. "You did right by her," the elderly man said quietly. "Your mother would be proud." David couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. The weeks of legal battles had been exhausting, but watching justice unfold before him brought a profound sense of relief. He caught Emma's eye across the courtroom and offered a small smile, which she tentatively returned. As they exited the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but David's security chief, James Miller, efficiently guided them through the crowd to a waiting vehicle. Inside the automobile, Emma climbed onto her father's lap for the first time since the nightmare began. "Is it really over, Daddy?" she asked. David wrapped his arms around his daughter, vowing silently never to fail her again. "Yes, sweetheart, it's really over. We're going home." William watched the pair with misty eyes. The family had been broken, but not beyond repair. The healing could finally begin. David Carter stood in the doorway of Emma's bedroom, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in months. The trial was over, Vanessa and her accomplices were facing justice. Now came the harder part, rebuilding what had been broken. In the weeks that followed, David took an extended leave from Carter Technologies, delegating responsibilities to his trusted management team. Emma became his sole priority. Each morning, they ate breakfast together, a simple ritual that slowly healed old wounds. He drove her to school himself, waiting to see her smile before pulling away from the curb. "Dad, can we visit Mom today?" Emma asked one Saturday morning, clutching her worn teddy bear. David nodded, his throat tight. Together they stood before Catherine Carter's grave, placing fresh flowers against the marble headstone. Emma traced her mother's name with small fingers. "I think she would be proud of you," David whispered, kneeling beside his daughter. "You were so brave." "Braver than you knew," Emma replied, with wisdom beyond her 7 years. William joined them for dinner each Sunday, his presence a steady anchor for both father and daughter. Rosa, no longer just a maid, but family, taught Emma to bake cookies using her grandmother's recipes. The kitchen, once a place of tension and fear, filled with laughter and the sweet scent of vanilla. The mansion transformed gradually. David converted Vanessa's former study into an art room where Emma could express herself through painting. Her drawings, once dark and troubling, slowly brightened with color and hope. Miss Parker visited occasionally, remarking on Emma's progress at school and the return of her natural curiosity. "She's speaking up in class again," the teacher told David one afternoon. "That's the Emma I remember." At night, when nightmares still came, David would sit beside Emma's bed, holding her hand until she drifted back to sleep. Sometimes they would talk about what happened, each conversation a small step toward healing. 3 years later, the Carter home bore little resemblance to the cold, tension-filled mansion of before. Emma, now 10, raced through hallways that echoed with the sound of her friends' laughter during weekend sleepovers. David had learned to balance work and fatherhood, never missing a school performance or parent-teacher conference. On Emma's 11th birthday, as she blew out candles surrounded by William, Rosa, and her school friends, David caught his daughter's eye across the table. Her smile, genuine and unguarded, was the greatest gift he could have received. "We made it, didn't we, Dad?" she asked later, as he tucked her in. "We did, sweetheart," David replied, kissing her forehead. "And we always will." In the quiet of Emma's room, with her teddy bear still watching from the shelf, father and daughter had found what they had almost lost forever: each other.